What if the biggest failure in leadership isn't, losing followers or missing that funding goal or even seeing your influence fade? The sources you sent over pose this really sharp question. What if the real risk is simply losing perspective?
That question really sets the stage, doesn't it? It defines our whole mission for this deep dive. We're unpacking this core argument that true, lasting leadership, well, it isn't really defined by those external metrics. It's about an internal viewpoint, an eternal one almost. The material basically says leadership is less about capacity, what you can do, and much more about clarity, how you see.
And goodness knows, clarity is needed right now. The sources really zero in on the volatility in organizations, the cultural pressures, the spiritual fatigue leaders are facing. It feels like in all that noise, perspective is just
Yeah.
critical. The goal here seems to be choosing to lead from God's perspective.
Exactly. If you're navigating fog, you need altitude. So, okay, here's the plan. We'll look at that basic split between human and divine perspectives. Where do they clash? Then we'll break down 4 key things needed for what the text calls high-altitude leadership, this mix of faith, wisdom, courage, and strategy. And finally, we'll pinpoint those 3 sort of gravitational pulls that drag leaders back down to earth, so to speak.
Okay, let's start with that divide. The human perspective versus the divine one. Our default, the human view, it's necessary for daily life, right? But
Well,
it's
yeah.
limited.
It is, and we need to be honest about those limits. Man's perspective, it's filtered through our senses, our immediate thoughts, our emotions, and definitely by time. We tend to focus on the urgent, the short-term, survival. So we measure success by numbers, applause, immediate wins.
Can you give a quick, modern example of that?
Sure, think about a leader whose company sees profits dip. A purely human reaction, often is panic. Quick cuts, maybe layoffs, damage control, restructure fast. The whole focus is stopping the bleeding this quarter. Survival now.
But the divine perspective, it changes the whole calculation.
Completely. It offers a limitless scope. It comes from omniscience, knowing past, present, future. It's eternal, outside our human deadlines. And it sees the whole picture, the heart of things, not just the surface. So challenges look different. A delay might actually be preparation time. Scarcity could be a nudge towards better strategy. Uncertainty, maybe it's a divine opportunity, that profit dip. It might not be failure at all. It could be a call to innovate or maybe even a necessary pruning to get rid of what's not working long term.
Okay, but here's the rub, right? It sounds good to say, oh, it's just pruning, but leaders face real pressure. Shareholders, donors, boards,
Yeah.
they want numbers now. That survival instinct, the human perspective, it feels very real.
That's the friction point, exactly. The sources don't pretend the earthly pressure disappears. What changes is where you get your validation from. It pushes the leader to anchor their identity, their decision-making, outside that immediate pressure cooker. Think about the story of Samuel anointing a new king. He saw Eliab tall, looked the part, right? Samuel was sure, judging by the resume, basically.
Ah, yes. And God's correction is unforgettable. The Lord doesn't see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.
That's the core of it. Human perspective, stature, skills, track record, divine perspective, character, potential, trajectory. So when you, listening right now, stop trying to see as God sees, you default back to survival mode, managing perceptions instead of pursuing purpose.
And the sources argue that switch from purpose-driven surrender to fear-driven survival, that's the starting point for burnout. That's where calling sours into competition.
Yes, you start treating symptoms, putting out fires, instead of addressing the root cause. You shift from the long game to just trying to win the next 5 minutes.
So if we buy into this higher perspective, how does a leader actually, do it? It can't just be a nice idea. It needs to be practical.
Oh, it's intensely practical, very active. Leading from altitude isn't passive. It's this dynamic blend, a synthesis of 4 elements working together. You need all 4. They are faith, wisdom, courage, and strategy.
Okay, let's take faith first. The sources call it the lens of the unseen. And you said it's not passive belief in God, but believing like God, seeing potential.
Right. Faith here is that deep, gut-level conviction that God's view is the actual reality, no matter what the spreadsheets or the news cycle says. It allows a leader to trust God's timing over the frantic demand for immediate results. The classic definition, assurance about what we do not see. Faith lets you plant seeds even when the ground looks totally barren.
But faith alone could be, well, reckless, couldn't it? Great faith. Terrible plan. That doesn't sound good either. So we need wisdom too.
Exactly. Wisdom is the intellectual partner to faith. It's about discerning God's mind. It's the skill, the practical application of divine truth. It helps leaders see past the surface symptoms to the underlying principles. both spiritual and natural. And here's where it gets tricky sometimes. Conventional wisdom might say, take that tax loophole. But divine wisdom might point to a simpler, maybe more costly upfront, but ultimately more ethical route.
That distinction's huge, and King Solomon is the classic example, right? Offered anything.
Yes, he didn't ask for wealth or military might. He asked for a discerning heart to tell right from wrong. He knew governing needed wisdom more than power. That's altitude leadership right there.
Okay, so faith gives the vision, wisdom shows the path. But seeing the path isn't enough if you're too scared to walk it. That brings us to courage, acting on God's imperatives.
Courage provides the necessary fuel for action. You need it because God's path often looks slower or harder or just plain weird compared to the culture around us. Courage lets leaders take those right risks, actions aligned with divine purpose, even if it means potential earthly loss or criticism. Standing up when sitting down is easier.
That's like God telling Joshua over and over, be strong and courageous, because facing giants and walls requires it.
Absolutely. And the final piece is strategy. This is where it all becomes concrete.
Implementing God's blueprint. So this isn't just waiting around, it's active planning and doing.
Precisely. A leader with altitude doesn't just pray. They prayerfully engineer the mission. They use their brains, build systems, manage resources, but all flowing from that divine perspective, not instead of it.
The sources point to Nehemiah as the perfect example of blending all four. He didn't just sit back and hope the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt themselves.
No way. He was a master synthesizer. He prayed constantly. That's faith. He got official permission from the Persian king. It's wisdom, navigating politics. He meticulously planned the resources and logistics. That's strategy. And he stood firm against intense opposition from guys like Sanballat and Tobiah. That's courage.
It's the seamless blend. Faith for vision, wisdom for path, courage for action, strategy for structure. If one leg of that stool is wobbly, the whole thing starts to dip.
And that dip, that loss of altitude, is where the real danger lies.
Which takes us to those forces pulling leaders down. The sources warn about these subtle gravitational pulls that can derail even the best leaders. What are the big internal threats?
The first one they mention, and it's maybe the sneakiest, is vision drift. It's that slow slide from asking what does God want to asking what works or what's popular right now.
Right. Happens when you chase trends, maybe. Or just constantly react to urgent crises. Or even when success makes you complacent. The focus shifts from the original why to just results or opinions.
Exactly. And King Saul is held up as the tragic poster child for this. God gave him a very clear instruction. Totally destroy the Amalekites.
Yeah.
Clear command. But after winning, Saul spared the best animals and the enemy king, Agag.
And his excuse was flimsy, wasn't it? He said he saved the animals for sacrifice, but the text says he was afraid of his own men.
He traded God's command for popular approval. Samuel's rebuke was brutal. Because you rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Saul won the battle cheers, but lost the kingdom. His vision drifted from God's word to pleasing people.
Oof. Okay, the second pitfall. This one probably hits home for a lot of listeners. Burnout.
Yes, burnout. Fundamentally, it's trying to do God's infinite work with purely human, finite energy. It's buying into the myth of self-sufficiency. It creeps in when we neglect the spiritual practices, the rest, the rhythms needed to maintain that high-altitude perspective. The weight of it all just becomes too much to carry alone.
The story of Elijah is incredible here. Right after this massive victory on Mount Carmel, calling down fire, defeating hundreds of false prophets, one threat from Queen Jezebel sends him running for his life, wanting to die.
His collapse wasn't really a faith failure. It was profound exhaustion. Physical, emotional, spiritual. He needed rest, rhythm, and to reconnect with God's provision. And notice God's response. Not a lecture, but food, sleep, and eventually that gentle whisper. It was a reminder that the work moves at God's pace, sustained by his strength, not just Elijah's heroic effort. Burnout's often a sign we've lost that perspective.
Okay, and the final pitfall, the deadliest one, forgetting the source.
This is when leaders start believing their own hype, attributing success, wisdom, strength to themselves, their cleverness, their amazing systems, instead of to God. It leads straight to pride, which is incredibly isolating and dangerous.
Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon comes to mind, standing on his palace roof, looking at the amazing city.
And declaring, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" All about him.
That self-focus, that pride, was his immediate undoing. God humbled him drastically until he finally acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign.
Today, maybe it's the leader attributing everything to their own genius or disruption. The antidote. Radical humility, constant gratitude, remembering I can do nothing apart from him.
So it sounds like the biggest battle for you, the leader listening, isn't the external stuff, competitors, markets. It's protecting that inner spiritual vision from these internal downward pulls, always asking, whose perspective am I actually operating from?
That's the heart of it. We've explored why seeing differently matters, blending faith, wisdom, courage, strategy. Leaders who endure, like Joseph seeing providence through prison, or Paul focusing on eternity, they refuse to trade God's revelation for short-term results.
And the sources wrap up with a really practical challenge for everyone listening.
They do. They argue knowledge isn't enough. It has to lead to transformation. The text actually invites you to draft your own seeing differently covenant. Not like a legal thing, but a personal commitment, a promise to yourself and God to deliberately align your daily choices, your leadership moves, with that divine viewpoint, a conscious choice for altitude.
And as we close out this deep dive, that idea of a covenant leaves us with one final, powerful question.
Yes, the ultimate measure of your leadership won't be what did you build. It won't be how big was your platform. The ultimate question, according to these sources, will be, did you finish well? And finishing well hinges on that one consistent choice, leading from altitude, not getting lost in the ground level fog.